Thank you so much for taking the time. My name's Joe from Guy at the Movies, and like I said, I watched No Ordinary Love last night, and oh man, that really touched on a lot of my nerves there. But we'll jump into that. It gripped me from the very beginning. I have to tell you that right off the bat. It was, I think, the very first couple of scenes with all of the major players. It was so fascinating to me that you see the love that's established in the authentic way between, Tanya and Faith, and then of course the absolute disdain between Michael and Liz that's happening in the other side of things. The film is just absolutely impactful and important, and I just congratulate you for that because I don't think it's something that we see all the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Start off by telling us a little bit about what led you to creating No Ordinary Love.
Yeah, well, I had a friend approach me about making this movie about these controlling relationships, dangerous relationships, and I thought, well, I like to watch movies about relationships, and I like to write them. So let's get into it. This will be a little different, and it was absolutely different.
Yes, I can imagine. And I have a couple questions about even diving into making a film like this and the toll that it must take on you and filmmakers. But I mean, just for those who are watching the interview down the line, the film focuses on two relationships in particular, two women in particular, in Taylor and Liz. I'm sorry, Tanya and Liz. Can you tell us a little bit? They're both going through different situations, but also the same situation in so many ways, and the same rhythm or the same aspects of an abusive relationship and domestic violence in all of its forms.
Yeah.
Um, why was it important to tell these two stories?
Well, for me, when I came into it, I didn't really understand what intimate partner violence was. I didn't understand. Like, I just thought if someone hits you, you leave. Like, it's just that simple. I was that person. Why didn't she just leave, or why doesn't he just leave? And when I got into the research of it for about 2.5 months, then I started to understand, okay, there are layers to this thing. It's really complex. And so I wanted to tell that story. It was important to tell it in as many different ways as possible. So we have this situation with these things and this situation with these things. And they are very different, but they're very much the same because the bottom line of these type of relationships is power and control.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On a personal note, my day job is I work for a higher education institution, and I work with Title IX and domestic violence in particular.
Yes.
So watching this just again fired me up because of so many readings and some of the different pieces of education that I've received over the years regarding the different forms of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. In this, you touch on gender roles, control, manipulation, guilt, passive aggressiveness. I mean, Michael was so passive aggressive in this film, and it drove me insane.
Yeah.
But then even diving into marital rape, and I mean, you mentioned talking, going through all the research. How do you even begin to research a topic as broad as this for a film?
Yeah. Well, I started with statistics. And because I wanted to know the facts when I went in to have the conversations with the different people, I actually sat with over 20 women, survivors of abuse. I sat in on court mandated sessions for offenders. I went to a DV homicide trial with the assistant DA here in Fort Worth.
Oof.
I went to shelters. 2.5 months, I read everything that I could get my hands on. I really wanted to understand and really be authentic to what this looked like.
So aside from, I mean, taking all that into consideration, and aside from the research stages, but even just showing up to make a movie like this every day, how difficult is this? Or is that number one? But how different from the other projects that you've been a part of?
You know what? I think the research and the writing probably was harder than the actual directing when I got to set because at that point it's like, okay, it's business and we need this shot and this shot and this shot, you know.
Sure.
But writing it definitely, one of my favorite quotes is no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. And so I take that and translate it to the movie. If I don't feel what these characters are feeling, or I don't, I don't laugh with them, I don't celebrate with them, I'm not nervous or scared with them, then the audience won't be either. So that's probably the hardest process for me. um Before I did this, I've done a few different things. I
Mhm.
did a comedy last year. I wrote it and I haven't shot it yet because of COVID. A thriller and all these other things. I'm all over the place. But my first short was Greenwood, which was a historical drama, and everybody's talking about it because the 100 years later. But that one was hard as well. So the research, the writing is hard, but afterward it's so rewarding. It's even more rewarding because you did something that means something.
And I think that comes through in the film. It's very authentic. Every emotion, it feels very authentic. And one of the first things I wrote down when I was watching it was, did you intend to anger so many viewers? Like, anger me right from the get go? Because I was raging from the very first setup of these two relationships. I was enraged.
Yeah, we get that. It's so funny because what I want to do is with Michael and Derek's characters, I wanted to humanize them so that you almost like you're trying to figure them out instead of just naming them a monster and going on. It's not that hard. If they're a monster, you throw the whole story away. But with them, like, we have gotten people to say, "Hey, are they here? Because I'm looking for them. Are they in the theater? Are they in the drive-through? Like, where are they? Because I want to find them."
Yeah,
And so we've gotten a lot of that. They've gotten like best actor awards. Like, they really nailed these characters where you kind of hate them.
they absolutely did.
Yeah.
Um, Question off of that, Derek, the way that you humanize him is very relevant in terms of societal conversation and his role as a police officer. That's a whole nother layer that I felt like could have used its own movie or multiple movies to tackle. Was that important for you to bring into this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started writing the movie, I again all the research and everything. So the way that I chose the characters, the men I chose first, the police officer, because actually domestic violence rates are a lot higher, like 4 times as high in a police officer household than they are in general public households. They're one of the top three abusive professions. So if you're looking at abusers, top three professions is like pilot, surgeon, and police officer. And I mean, they're trained to use lethal weapons. They like in this particular thing, like there's a line, who do you call? If
Absolutely.
if someone is attacking you and they're a police officer, who do you call? His coworkers, his friends, his peers? Who are you calling? So I thought it was important to talk about that.
And that also plays out so perfectly in a scene in the movie with two officers approaching it very differently when they're on the
Hmm.
scene.
Hmm.
The other topic that is broached is religion. And this one was really fascinating to me because I had read back in the day that, well, first of all, I feel like religion is untouchable in a lot of conversations around domestic violence or anything of such negativity isn't the proper word, but of such consequence. Um, I remember reading back that the manipulation of religious texts and religious beliefs is very prominent in many domestic violence situations, and one of them, in particular, divorce in general, obviously has the religious connotations. That's an incredibly large hill to climb in tackling that, and it's done so well in this film between the characters. Was that important as well to dive into the religious aspects of domestic violence?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm in Texas, so we're part of the Bible Belt. So it's all around us. And this is not to say, I try to show the good and the bad of both sides of this thing, police officers and church leaders and so forth. But I've seen a lot of scriptural manipulation. Wives, you're beneath your husband. You are to obey. You are obligated to do these things, and that's just not the way that it's written. It's not complete. Read the whole scripture, or like,
Right.
but there's a lot of that with church leaders in their congregation, church leaders in their homes. So we had to have that conversation as well. That was important to me.
I think it's very important and it's very well presented here. I have to say that every time a line came up of, you know, a woman's place is, or my poor dog, I was screaming in my place. It was driving me nuts, but it's the emotion that I was feeling. Definitely, I think, connected with what you were intending there.
Mhm.
Um, but I want to talk about the cast a little bit, especially Deanna Davis and April Hartman. I mean, they were absolutely phenomenal. And of course, the entire cast is. Um, both of their characters are subjected to dangerous conditions, as we had talked about, and dangerous situations. And without spoiling things, they each end up in very different places than I originally thought that they would.
Mhm.
Can you speak about that?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll say I agree with you. Both women did a phenomenal job. They showed up every single day. They knew who their character was. I mean, they did a great job. And Deanna Davis, this is her first movie.
Oh, wow. Really? Oof,
Yeah. Unbelievable, right?
absolutely.
Like she dug into that character and she blew us away daily. Like daily, the whole cast. But I was really impressed that she didn't have that background and she came in and nailed it. Um, but as far as their situations, I it took me a while because I knew how I wanted the story to end. And I won't say, of course, what it is, but I also wanted to like take viewers by surprise. I wanted them to think one thing and something totally different happen. But I wanted them to move almost in a parallel manner. Like they're going through almost the same thing without it looking the same, and their endings could have been swapped so easily, and so that was definitely intentional, that it ended the way that it did and how their stories just really intersected all over the place.
I will say that it certainly leaves you wanting to know more about the characters at the end, what happens to them, and you know the next steps in any situation like this, whether that involves legal or judicial or whatever it may be. So definitely on the lookout for that if there's ever a sequel or a follow up. But um, one of the other actresses that I wanted to touch on was the young actress here that played Faith. There were a couple scenes with her that were just absolutely heartbreaking, and one in particular was when she's playing with the dolls
Mhm.
with her friend, and that just absolutely killed me. But I'm thinking constantly in films like this with such heavy subjects and such young actors. Um, what kind of responsibility do you feel as a filmmaker in kind of helping them through this role and understanding what they're participating in? Because she's in the throes of much of the developments in this film, many of the developments in this film.
Yeah, absolutely. So Naya, who played Faith, first of all, she's such a sweet girl and she's a great actress. But it was very important for me to speak with her and her parents before we even got to set. So before we got the script, when she came out to audition, and when I decided, I mean, she nailed her audition. She was so good. And when I made the decision that she was going to have the role, we had to have a conversation and say, okay, here's how we're going to do this. A lot of those scenes, not the doll scene, obviously, but a lot of those scenes where we see her, but she's not in frame with her
Mhm.
parents, it was filmed different or separately. And I did that because even though she had understood exactly what was going on, what was wrong with it, um, and some things, consequences, and all of that, I didn't necessarily want to put that in her head,
Sure.
what she was, what she could have seen. So I just had to coach her, like, this is what's happening. And she knew, and her parents spoke with her, and they were fantastic. Um, but yeah, the doll scene was really important because that was more a message to parents. Your kids hear and see things that you don't know that they're hearing and seeing, and they're
Absolutely.
smarter than we think they are, always.
Absolutely. That just stuck with me. I've been thinking about it since watching, and it is a very impactful scene. I think, especially for Tanya as the mother, seeing that and what that does to her psyche in terms of how she's managing the situation with Derek. It's just, whew.
Yeah.
Which I guess it transitions to one of my final questions: is how do you draw the line, or kind of balance the line, balance on the line, I guess, between entertainment and a film with such impact and importance? Because it is a very entertaining film in the sense that you're very invested in the stories, but it's also very impactful and, as I said multiple times, authentic. As a filmmaker, how do you go about that?
Well, that was really important to me. So when I started the research, I knew that it wouldn't be a documentary or PSA style type of deal because people do want to go to the movies and be entertained, even if they leave and they're yelling at the screen and all of that, like because that happens often. But it was important to me to be really authentic to the issue, but then also, give people something that they can feel when they're watching the movie and
Mhm.
something that they'll come back to. Like there are movies right now that I watched years ago and I always go back to them for whatever reason, depending on my mood. I wanted No Ordinary Love to be a movie you could go back to, that you wanted to watch again, at some point or tell somebody about. And that's important in indie filmmaking. You have to have a movie that people talk about. And definitely after this one.
I have to tell you, what do I know as a Pennsylvania film critic, but the fact that this movie isn't getting much more conversation, it isn't a marquee film out there, and is still considered, the indie that's coming out in a few weeks and so on and so forth. This is such an impactful film. And aside from that, just so beautifully shot, so beautifully acted, so beautifully written. I can't say enough good things about it. And the messages, my final question for you is just what do you hope that people take from viewing No Ordinary Love?
um, you know what? I hope they walk away with a new awareness, not just in their own lives, but the people that they love. Like pay attention because there may be some things that you're missing. And then also, have the conversation, speak up about it. It's around us. One in three women globally are in this situation. One in three. That means it's either you or someone, it's your family member, you've witnessed it, you've seen it, you've experienced whatever it is. And I think the more we talk about it, because it's kind of one of those closeted subjects, we can't talk about it, not in movies, not in conversation. Don't air your family's dirty laundry. Shh, be quiet. And I think I'm hoping that this film gives viewers the permission to not be quiet anymore.
I, that just reminded me of a scene where I think it's Michael who says to Liz, "Everyone's going to think you're crazy," and she says, "Well, I don't give a damn." And I was like, "Yes!" Like me, people need to think that way. And it's hard, obviously. I mean, in the situation, but just that's why I think films like this are important to see that growth in a character and the impact of the topic being discussed on such a wide platform. So Chyna, I don't say this all the time, honestly, but now you're on my radar in terms of I can't wait to see what you do next, because the way that you told this story and made such an impact with the topic itself just really sticks with me, and I think will stick with me. So I'm excited to see what comes down the road.
Wow, thank you. I'm honored. Just to be having the conversation with you, and for that, I'm very appreciative.
Absolutely. So you mentioned a comedy film that you wrote. Is that gonna get into gear now that restrictions are lifting a little bit here and
Well,
there?
yeah, I'm hoping so. So here's the plan. The comedy is actually for television.
Okay.
So it's episodic, but I'm also working on a sci-fi fantasy film. So it's, lighter for families. And I told you I was in every genre.
Oh,
I
wow.
love,
Yeah, you're all over in the genres. That's amazing.
I've always been that way. I always wrote all over the place. So those are two things that I plan to get into this year and going into next.
That's excellent. And No Ordinary Love is coming out June 15th. And I hope that everyone goes and sees this movie because you will leave angry, just as I did, but better for it. But thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon. I really appreciate it. And again, thanks for the film because it was really a joy to watch.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Take care.
Bye bye.